So Leighton had a whole second life. A whole second life. Second apartment, second girlfriend, a 2-year-old son, child support payments, the works. And I found out because the county clerk's office sent a child support enforcement notice to the wrong address. Our address. The one where I paid half the rent. The one where I kept his favorite oat milk stocked in the fridge like some kind of devoted idiot. The one where 5 days earlier he sat across from me at our kitchen table and cried about money problems and asked me to lend him $1,500. I need to back up because you guys need the full picture to understand how absolutely unhinged this whole thing is. I met Leighton almost 2.5 years ago at a cookout in Boise. Not like a big event or anything, just one of those backyard things where someone sets up a fold-out table with too much potato salad and a Bluetooth speaker playing the same playlist on shuffle. My friend Sienna was seeing some guy who lived in the house and she didn't want to show up alone. I almost didn't go. I had a 12-hour shift the next morning and it was already past 9. But Sienna has this way of making you feel like you're personally destroying her life if you say no to anything. So I went. Leighton was already there when we walked through the side gate into the backyard. He wasn't the loudest person out there, wasn't trying to be the center of anything. He was leaning against the fence talking to 2 other guys about something. And when Sienna and I came around the corner, he looked over and just kind of smiled at me. Not in a creepy way, just acknowledged I existed. Which honestly at that point in my life was enough because I'd spent the last 1.5 years getting over a situationship that wrecked me, and my standards were literally on the floor. We talked most of that night. Found out he'd moved to Boise from somewhere in eastern Oregon. Said he wanted a fresh start, liked the pace out here, was tired of how small everything felt where he came from. I thought that was mature. I thought a lot of things about Leighton were mature. He drove this dark green Subaru Outback that was clean inside, which I know sounds stupid, but after dating guys whose cars smelled like old Taco Bell and gym bags, a clean car felt like something worth noticing. He had a steady paycheck, didn't talk trash about his exes, asked me actual questions about my life, and remembered the answers. He remembered I said my mom's birthday was coming up, and 2 weeks later when we were texting, he asked how it went. That stuff mattered to me. We started dating pretty quickly after that. By month 3, he was staying at my place most nights anyway, so we talked about getting a place together. My lease was ending, and his rental situation was month to month, so the timing worked. We found a 2-bedroom apartment on the west end of town. Rent was reasonable, split down the middle, and for the first year, things were genuinely good. Like boring good. We grocery shopped together on Saturday mornings at the Winco near the freeway. He'd make these big breakfasts on his days off, eggs and turkey sausage, and these dense little pancakes that were honestly kind of terrible, but he was so proud of them I never said anything. We had a routine. I liked the routine. After years of chaotic dating and guys who couldn't commit to a dinner plan, let alone a lease, having someone who just showed up consistently felt like enough. Okay, so here's where things start getting relevant. About a year into living together, Leighton started being weird about money, not in an obvious way at first, just little things. He used to split everything right down the middle without even thinking about it. Groceries, rent, the internet bill, whatever. Then around month 13 or 14, he started being late on his half. First, it was the electric bill. Said he forgot, paid it a week later, no big deal. Then it was groceries. He'd come home and I'd mention we needed stuff and he'd kind of dodge it or say he'd Venmo me later. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't, and I started keeping a mental tally, which I hated doing because it made me feel like his accountant, not his girlfriend. I brought it up once while we were eating on the couch, tried to keep it casual. Just said, hey, I've noticed money has been a little tight for you lately. Is everything okay? And he got this look on his face, not angry exactly, but closed off. He told me work had cut some of his hours and he was figuring it out. Said he didn't want to stress me out with it. I told him I wasn't stressed, I just wanted to know what was going on so we could handle it together. He said he appreciated that and then started going off about how his buddy Trevor wanted to plan some camping trip that summer up near McCall. Classic redirect. I let it go because I didn't want to be that girlfriend who turns every conversation into a money interrogation, but the thing kept escalating. Over the next few months, Leighton went from occasionally being short on his half to consistently being behind. I picked up his portion of rent twice. I covered groceries for like 6 weeks straight. I paid for every single time we went out to eat, which wasn't even that often because I was trying to be careful with my own money since I was apparently funding 2 people's lives now. And every time I brought it up, he had a reason. Hours got cut again. His car needed work. He was waiting on some reimbursement. There was always a reason, and the reasons always sounded just plausible enough that pushing back felt like I was being paranoid or unsupportive. My dad noticed before I wanted to admit it. We were at my parents' house in Meridian for a Sunday thing, which happened maybe twice a month. My parents are big on that. My dad especially likes to grill out on the back patio and make everyone sit down together like it's some kind of event, even if it's just burgers. He's not the type to say much. He mostly just observes and then drops one sentence that hits you 3 days later when you're driving to work. That particular Sunday, he pulled me aside while my mom and Leighton were in the kitchen cleaning up, and he just looked at me and said he noticed I'd been looking stressed, and if money was tight, I could always come to him. I told him everything was fine. He didn't push it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. My dad has this thing where he won't argue with you, but he'll look at you long enough that you feel the argument happening anyway. My mom, on the other hand, is not subtle about anything. She'd been making little comments for weeks. Nothing direct, just things like, "Oh, that's a nice jacket, Leighton. Is that new?" Delivered in a tone that made it clear she was keeping track of where money was going. Or she'd ask me how things were going with the apartment and then pause just long enough before changing the subject that I knew she had more to say. My parents aren't rich by any means, but they've always been solid, and they raised me to handle my finances, and watching me slowly become someone else's safety net was killing both of them in different ways. My dad worried quietly. My mom worried loudly, but in passive-aggressive little jabs that Leighton never picked up on because he wasn't paying enough attention. Fast forward to about 5 months before everything blew up. Leighton started disappearing. I mean, he'd be gone for stretches of time that didn't totally add up. He'd leave on a Saturday morning saying he was going to help Trevor with something and not be back until Sunday night. He'd have these random weeknight things where he needed to drive somewhere, some kind of overnight situation that he was vague about. I asked questions. I always asked questions. And the answers were always just enough to make me feel like maybe I was overthinking it. Trevor's truck broke down out past Nampa and he needed help. Work sent him to some site out in Twin Falls for a couple days. His cousin needed a hand moving stuff down in the valley. Every time it was something, and every time it was just believable enough. But the frequency, that's what started really getting to me. It went from once a month to twice a month to almost every week there was some reason he needed to be gone. And the money situation didn't improve, it got worse. He was coming up short on rent, asking me to cover things he used to handle without even blinking, and somehow also had gas money to drive hours to help people with stuff every single weekend. I started doing the math in my head and the math wasn't mathing. And then came the $1,500 conversation. This was about 5 or 6 days before the letter showed up. It was a Wednesday night. I came home and Leighton was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. No food cooking, no TV on, just sitting there. I asked what was going on. He didn't look up for a second, and when he did, he had tears in his eyes. Real tears. Or what I thought were real tears. He told me he was drowning, that he'd been trying to keep it together, but he was behind on everything and he didn't know what to do. He said he needed $1,500 to cover a combination of things, some back payments on his car insurance, something with a medical bill from when he went to urgent care a couple months ago, other stuff that had piled up. And I sat there across from him and I felt bad for him. That's the part that makes me the most angry now. I felt bad for this man. I was already covering most of our shared expenses. I was dipping into my own savings every month to compensate for what he wasn't contributing. And he sat there and cried and asked me for more money. And my first instinct was to feel sorry for him. I told him I needed to think about it. He kissed my forehead and told me he didn't deserve me. Didn't deserve me. That one sentence is going to live in my head forever because it's the one honest thing he ever said to me. I talked to my mom about it the next day, called her on my lunch break and laid it out. She told me point blank that something wasn't adding up, and that a grown man who can't keep his finances together after 2 years is either hiding something or is never going to get it together. And either way, I needed to stop being his bank. She said she loved me, but I was being foolish with my money, and she didn't raise me to be foolish. My mom is the type to say the thing you don't want to hear and mean every syllable of it. I told her I knew, but that I didn't think he was a bad person, just going through something. She said rough patches don't last 2 years, and that I should talk to my dad because he'd been wanting to say something for months but was holding back because he didn't want to overstep. I didn't call my dad. I should have. Instead, I went home and started leaning toward giving Leighton the money because that's how deep in it I was. I was going to transfer it that weekend. Then the letter came. It was a Monday. I got home before Leighton, which was normal. I usually beat him home by about an hour. I grabbed the mail from the cluster box at the front of the complex like I always did. Electric bill, some junk, a coupon flyer from a pizza chain, and then this envelope from the county. It was addressed to Leighton. I almost just set it on the counter with the rest of his stuff. I literally almost didn't look at it twice. But something about it. It looked official. Not like junk mail official, like government official. And after the conversation with my mom and the money stuff and all the weekend disappearances, I was already in this headspace where I was paying more attention to everything. I opened it. I know. It wasn't addressed to me. But we'd been together over 2 years, living together for almost 2 of those. And when your boyfriend is asking you for $1,500 while crying at the kitchen table, I think you earn the right to open an envelope from the county with his name on it. Fight me on that in the comments. I genuinely do not care. It was a child support enforcement notice, payment delinquency. for a minor child. Age 2. Mother's name listed right there on the paper. A second address listed as his alternate residence. An address I had never seen before in my life. I read it 3 times, standing right there by the front door with my jacket still on and the rest of the mail under my arm. 3 times because my brain kept trying to rearrange the words into something that made sense with the life I thought I was living. A 2-year-old. That meant this child was conceived right around when Leighton and I started dating. Or before. But the math was close enough that it didn't matter which side of the line it fell on. He had a child. He was paying child support. Or more accurately, not paying child support, based on what this notice said. And he had a second address, an entirely separate address that I knew nothing about. I put the letter on the kitchen table, face up, sat down on the couch in the living room where I could see the table, and I waited. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there with my jacket still zipped up and waited for him to come through that door because I needed to see his face when he saw that letter. I needed to know in the first second whether this was going to be confusion or recognition. That was going to tell me everything. He got home about 50 minutes later. Came in the door, smiled at me, walked over and kissed me on the cheek, called me baby, asked me what I wanted for dinner, said he was thinking about picking up something from that place I liked on Fairview. And while he was talking, he walked toward the kitchen and his eyes went to the table the way they always did when he checked the mail, just a casual glance, and he stopped talking, mid-sentence, just stopped, and his face went completely flat. Not shocked, not confused, flat, like someone had pressed a reset button, like he'd been rehearsing for this moment in his head and now that it was here, his brain just went to nothing. That told me everything. A person who has no idea what they're looking at picks it up. They say, "What is this?" They look confused. Leighton didn't do any of that. He stood there and looked at that letter like he'd been dreading it showing up for 2 years. I stood up, picked up my bag that I hadn't even put down yet, and I walked toward the door. He started talking immediately, saying my name over and over, calling me baby, saying, wait, just let him explain. Swearing on his mother's life, the letter was some kind of mistake, that it was old, from a situation that was handled, that I needed to just sit down and let him talk. His voice got louder the closer I got to the door. By the time I had my hand on the knob, he was practically yelling, saying I was making a huge mistake and if I just gave him 5 minutes, he could explain everything. I turned around. I told him I opened that letter, that I read every word, that a child support notice for a 2-year-old and a second address aren't the kind of things that get cleared up in 5 minutes. I told him he had a child he never told me about, he had another address he never mentioned, and 5 days ago he sat at that same table and cried to my face about money while apparently maintaining a second apartment and dodging child support. I told him I was leaving and he was not going to follow me. He tried to step in front of the door, hands up saying, please, just give him a chance. Started rambling about how it wasn't what it looked like, and the apartment was for something else, and the kid's situation was complicated and he was going to tell me, but the timing was never right. I told him to move. He didn't. I told him again. He kept going, talking faster, saying things were more complicated than I understood, and if I would just sit down for 10 minutes, he could make it make sense. I told him there is no amount of minutes that makes a secret child, and a second apartment makes sense, and to move. He moved. I drove straight to my parents' house in Meridian. Didn't call ahead, just showed up. My mom opened the front door and one look at my face, and she stepped aside without asking anything. My dad came around the corner from the hallway, still in his house shoes, and looked at me and looked at my mom, and she gave him this small shake of her head like not yet. I sat down at their kitchen table and told them everything. The letter, the child support, the second address, the $1,500, all of it. My mom didn't say I told you so. She just put her hand over mine. My dad sat down across from me, and his first question was whether Leighton knew where they lived. That question. The fact that my dad's first reaction wasn't anger, but practical safety. He got up and checked the front door deadbolt and the sliding door to the patio and came back and sat down and said I could stay as long as I needed and that Leighton was not welcome at their house. Period. My phone was already going off. Leighton had sent 14 texts in the 25 minutes it took me to drive there. I didn't read them, turned my phone face down on the table and looked at my parents and said, I think I've been really stupid. My mom squeezed my hand and told me I wasn't stupid, I was trusting and there's a difference, but now the trust was done and we were going to figure this out together. I stayed at my parents' house that night. Slept in my old room that still had my high school comforter on it because my mom refuses to change anything, like walking into a time capsule of my 17-year-old self. Lay there staring at the ceiling trying to calculate how someone spends over 2 years with another person and hides an entire child. How he sat across from me and cried about money while keeping up a whole separate household. I had 41 messages by morning. I didn't read a single one. I know this is already super long, but I'm barely getting into the actual insanity because the letter and the second apartment and the kid, that was just the door opening. What came after I left that night? what Leighton did over the next few weeks, what I found out about the other girl, and how deep this whole thing actually went. It was so much worse than a child support notice, and I genuinely didn't see any of it coming. I'll update soon. Need to take a break because typing this out is making me want to scream all over again. The clean car, the remembered birthday, the oat milk in the fridge, that's all it takes apparently. And I'm not dragging her for it because we have all built a whole future off a man who simply showed up and acted like a normal person. We set the bar so low it's underground, and then when a guy steps over it, we're like, OMG, he's different. No, babe. He just knows what normal looks like and he's performing it. Some men don't love you. They just study what love is supposed to look like and do that until they get caught. The money thing is what has me wanting to throw my phone, because this man didn't just go broke. He went broke in her direction. He made her the ATM for the life she didn't know about. Every grocery run she covered, every rent check she floated, every single dollar she handed over was funding apartment number 2 and a whole child. She was basically working overtime to sponsor her own betrayal. And the $1,500 cry session at the kitchen table? That man was on borrowed time and he still tried to make one last withdrawal. That's not even bold anymore. That's just disrespectful on a level I can't even process. Update. A lot of you asked for an update, and honestly, I've been going back and forth about whether to post one, because every time I start typing, I get mad all over again and then I go on a tangent and delete everything. But you guys deserve the full story, so here we go. The morning after I left, I woke up at like 5:30 because I couldn't really sleep anyway. Went out to the kitchen, and my dad was already up, which is normal for him. The man has been waking up before the sun his entire life, like it's a personal competition. He was making coffee, and he looked at me and asked if I wanted some, and that was it. No big speech, no questions, just coffee. I sat there at the counter and finally looked at my phone. 41 texts had turned into 50-something overnight, plus 6 missed calls. I scrolled through some of them. The first few were what you'd expect. Baby, please come home. We need to talk about this. You're overreacting. This isn't what you think. Let me explain. Then they got longer. He started writing these paragraph-length messages about how the child support situation was from before we were together, and he didn't know how to bring it up. How the second address was just somewhere he crashed sometimes when he was helping his friend with something. How he loved me, and this was all a misunderstanding and he was going to fix it. Then by like 2 in the morning, the tone shifted. He started saying stuff like, I can't believe you just left without even listening to me. That I owed him a conversation. That walking out like that was messed up and he at least deserved a chance to tell his side. The audacity of this man using the word owed like I was the one keeping secrets. I showed my dad a couple of the texts. He read them with that completely still face he does, scrolled through a few, then handed my phone back and told me that a man who has been lying for 2 years doesn't suddenly discover honesty in a text message, and that I should talk to him when I was ready, but on my terms and not alone. My mom came out about an hour later and she was a completely different energy. She wanted to know everything. She sat down with her coffee and started asking me questions like she was running some kind of investigation. How long had the money issues been going on? How often was he gone on weekends? Did I ever meet this Trevor person he was always supposedly helping? Had Leighton ever mentioned any ex being pregnant or having kids? She was going through it point by point, and honestly it helped, because hearing someone else lay out the pattern made me realize how much I'd been dismissing. I told her that actually, no, I had never met Trevor. In over 2 years, I had never once met this person that Leighton supposedly spent every other weekend with. Trevor was always somewhere else when I was around. Every time I suggested we all hang out or I come along to whatever Trevor thing was happening, there was a reason I couldn't. Trevor was busy. It was a guy thing. They were going to be out in the middle of nowhere working on his property. 2.5 years, and the closest I got to Trevor was hearing Leighton talk about him. My mom looked at my dad. My dad looked at his coffee. Nobody said anything for about 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds, I watched both my parents arrive at the same conclusion I was only just starting to get to, which was that Trevor might not be the person I thought he was or might not exist in the capacity Leighton described. Every weekend trip, every overnight thing, every time Leighton was gone and unreachable, he wasn't with Trevor. He was at that second apartment. With her. With the kid. I decided I wasn't going to just sit at my parents' house waiting. That's not me. I told them I was going to go back to the apartment when Leighton was at work and get my stuff. My dad immediately said he was coming with me. My mom said she was coming too. I told her she didn't need to, and she gave me this look that made it very clear that wasn't a suggestion, and she was getting in that car whether I invited her or not. We went Tuesday afternoon. I knew Leighton's schedule well enough to know he'd be gone until at least 5. My dad drove. We pulled into the parking lot, and I swear my stomach did something when I saw the building, because 24 hours earlier that was my home, and now it felt like walking into a stranger's house. My mom stayed in the car as a lookout, which sounds dramatic, but she insisted, and honestly having her out there texting me updates like, "No green Subaru yet, you're good," was weirdly comforting. I packed fast. I didn't take everything because I didn't have room, just clothes, toiletries, my documents, the stuff that mattered. My dad helped me carry bags without saying much. At one point, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked around the apartment and asked me how much of the furniture was mine. I told him the couch was mine, the bedroom set was mine, the TV was mine, the kitchen table was mine. He nodded and said we'd come back for it. Then he looked at the counter and I saw his jaw tighten because there were 2 empty beer cans and a takeout container from the night before. Leighton had apparently gone straight from begging me to come home to ordering himself dinner and drinking beer. That detail shouldn't have mattered, but it did. It told me everything about how panicked he actually was, which was not very. We got out of there in about 40 minutes, loaded up my dad's truck and left. On the drive back, my mom called from her car behind us, and the first thing she said was that she saw the potholes in that parking lot, and she always knew that complex was trash and she felt vindicated. My mom processes stress through property criticism, apparently. That night, Leighton called. Not texted, called, and I picked up. I know some of you are going to tell me I shouldn't have, but I needed to hear what he was going to say. I needed to hear him try to explain this because a part of me, and I'm being honest here, a part of me was still holding on to some impossible scenario where this all had an explanation that didn't involve what I already knew it involved. I put him on speaker with my mom in the room because I wasn't doing this alone. He started calm, almost rehearsed. He told me the child was his, but the relationship with the mother was over before he and I even met, that they had a brief thing, she got pregnant, and by the time the baby was born, they weren't together anymore. He said he didn't tell me because he was ashamed and scared I'd leave. He said he'd been trying to figure out how to bring it up for 2 years, and the longer he waited, the harder it got. Classic. The longer you wait, the harder it gets, so you just never do it. Real convenient logic. I let him talk for about 3 minutes without interrupting because I wanted to hear the full performance. Then I asked about the apartment. Why did he have a second address listed on a government document? He paused. And in that pause, I heard everything I needed to hear because someone with a simple answer doesn't pause. He told me it was a place he was renting before we moved in together, and he never fully gave it up because he still had some stuff there. That it was like storage, basically. He was paying almost nothing for it. It was no big deal. I asked him if that's where his money was going. All those months of being short on rent, needing me to cover things, asking me for $1,500 crying at the kitchen table. Was that money going to a second apartment he told me didn't exist? He started with a different angle. He said things got complicated because the child support payments started and he didn't know how to handle them and handle our bills at the same time. He said he was trying to take care of his kid and take care of us simultaneously, and it was eating him alive. He said he wasn't trying to deceive me, he was trying to survive. And that's when I asked the question that changed everything. I asked him if the mother of his child had ever been to that apartment. The silence was different this time. It wasn't a pause while he figured out what to say. It was the silence of someone who just realized the conversation went somewhere they weren't prepared for. My mom was sitting across from me at the table, and I watched her lean forward because she heard it too. He said, "What do you mean?" I told him, "Don't do that. Don't answer a question with a question." I asked him straight up, has this woman, the mother of your child, ever been inside that apartment? Has she stayed there? Has she slept there? While you were living with me and sleeping in my bed and eating food I paid for, was she at that apartment? He told me it wasn't like that. I told him what wasn't like that. I asked a yes or no question. My mom was gripping the edge of the table at this point. He started talking about how co-parenting is complicated and sometimes you have to be present for your kid, and that means being around the mother, and it doesn't mean anything romantic, and I shouldn't jump to conclusions. I stopped him. I said, "Leighton, I'm going to ask you one more time, and if you lie to me, I swear I will never speak to you again as long as I live. Is that apartment where she lives? Is that apartment where you go every weekend when you tell me you're with Trevor? Is that where the $1,500 was actually going?" And he said, "Yes, she lives there. But it's not what I think." My mom stood up from the table and walked out of the room. I heard the back patio door open and close. My dad told me later she went out there and just stood in the yard for a few minutes because she was so angry she didn't trust herself to stay in the room and not grab the phone and start yelling at him herself. I stayed on the line. I told him to keep talking. He said the woman, her name was Mona, had nowhere to go when the baby was born, and he felt responsible, so he set her up in that apartment. He said he was paying the rent there and paying child support on top of it, and that's why money was so tight. He said Mona and the baby had been living there for almost a year and a half. He said he went there on weekends to see his son. I asked him if he was sleeping with her. He said no. I asked him again louder. He said no, that it was strictly about the kid, that he and Mona were done romantically, and had been since before she even got pregnant. I told him that statement didn't even make logical sense because if they were done before she got pregnant, then how did she get pregnant? He started stumbling over his words, saying he meant they broke up. And then there was one time, and then she told him she was pregnant, and by then he was already with me, and he panicked. So let me just break this down for everyone keeping score. This man met me, started dating me, moved in with me, let me believe we were building a life together, and the entire time he had a woman and a baby in a separate apartment across town that he was financially supporting with money he should have been contributing to our household. Every weekend he told me he was with Trevor, he was with them. Every time I covered his rent or bought all the groceries or questioned why he was always broke, the answer was because he was running 2 lives simultaneously. And when the money got too tight to keep it all going, he sat at our kitchen table and cried and asked me to fund the gap. He asked me for $1,500 to help pay for the life he was hiding from me. I told him I was done, that there was nothing else to talk about, that he had lied to me every single day for over 2 years, and there is no version of an explanation that fixes that. He started going off about how I wasn't being fair, that he was trying to be a good father and I should understand that he didn't plan for any of this to happen and he was just trying to do the right thing for everyone. I told him doing the right thing for everyone doesn't include lying to the person you're sleeping next to every night and using her money to finance a secret family. That's not being a good father. That's being a coward who wanted to have everything without the consequences of any of it. He started saying I was being cruel and that I didn't know what it was like to be in his position. I told him I didn't want to know what it was like to be in his position because his position was built on 2 years of lies. And I wasn't interested in seeing things from the perspective of someone who did that. He said I was punishing him for trying to take care of his kid. I told him no, I was leaving him for lying to my face every day, using my money under false pretenses, and maintaining an entire relationship with another woman while pretending to be committed to me. Those are different things. My mom came back inside at some point during this. She sat back down across from me and just listened. When Leighton started repeating himself, going back around to the same points about how he was just trying to be a good dad and didn't know how to tell me, my mom leaned toward the phone and told him that her daughter asked him to stop calling. She said it in this voice I've maybe heard 3 times in my life, this flat, quiet tone that is way scarier than yelling, and then she hung up for me. I looked at her and she looked at me and said, "That man is not sorry. He's sorry he got caught, and you are staying here until you figure out your next move, and that's final." My dad had been in the other room during all of this, but he came out after the call ended. He asked me if I was okay, and I told him honestly, I wasn't even sure what okay meant at this point. But I wasn't crying, so that was something. He sat down and said one thing that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. He said that he had watched me give Leighton the benefit of the doubt for 2 years, and he'd kept his mouth shut because I'm an adult and it wasn't his place. But now that it was over, he wanted me to know that a man who hides his child from the woman he lives with is not hiding the child to protect anyone. He's hiding the child because the child is evidence of the life he doesn't want you to know about. And a man like that doesn't change. He just finds better hiding spots. I sat with that for a while. Now here's the part that some of you are going to lose your minds over because I kind of lost mine when it happened. 2 days after the phone call, I was at the grocery store in Meridian. I'd been staying at my parents' house and trying to feel like a person again, and I needed to get out, so I drove to the store to grab a few things. Normal, mundane, nothing activity. I was in the cereal aisle comparing prices on granola. And then I turned the corner into the next aisle and there was Leighton, with a stroller, with a baby in the stroller, and a woman walking next to him, in Meridian, 40 minutes from our apartment in Boise. At the grocery store that's 5 minutes from my parents' house. I stopped. He saw me immediately, and for about 3 seconds we just stood there looking at each other in the middle of the canned goods aisle, and I got to see in real time exactly what this man looked like when his 2 worlds collided in person. The woman looked at me, looked at him, and clearly had no idea who I was because she asked him something and he didn't answer her. He was staring at me. She looked back at me and I could see her trying to figure out the situation. I didn't leave. I walked right up to them. And you guys, I need you to understand that in this moment, I was so far past hurt and into pure fury that I was almost calm about it. I looked at her, and then I looked at him, and I told him that this must be complicated co-parenting situation he told me about on the phone. The one that was totally not romantic. The one where she just happened to live in his secret apartment, and they were just casually pushing a stroller together through a grocery store 40 minutes from his actual address. Mona looked at Leighton with this expression that I'm going to think about for a long time because it wasn't confusion. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. She knew exactly who I was. Maybe not my name, maybe not the details, but she knew I existed in some capacity because the expression on her face was not, "Who is this stranger?" It was, "Oh, so this is finally happening." Leighton started with my name, telling me this wasn't the time or place, that I was making a scene. I told him I wasn't making anything. He made this situation when he decided to run 2 relationships simultaneously, and if he was embarrassed about it, that wasn't my problem. Mona still hadn't said anything to me directly, but she was looking at him the way you look at someone when you realize you've been given the wrong version of a story. And that is where I need to stop for now, because what happened next in that grocery store and what Mona said when she finally opened her mouth is a whole separate thing, and I'm already at the point where my hands are cramping from typing. The good father card is the one that makes me want to scream into a pillow because men like this love to suddenly discover fatherhood the second they get caught. Suddenly it's all about the baby. Suddenly he's just trying to do right by his kid. Suddenly you're the bad guy for not being more understanding about his situation. But being a good dad and being honest with your girlfriend are not opposite things. You can literally do both at the same time. He just didn't want to because telling the truth would have ended his little arrangement where one woman funds his life and the other one thinks she's his whole world. He didn't choose between being a father and being honest. He chose himself over everybody, and then dressed it up like sacrifice. And you know what kills me is how fast these men flip the script when they're cornered. 1 minute it's baby, please let me explain, and then the second you don't fold it becomes you're being unfair and you owe me a conversation. Like, no sir, the only thing owed in this situation is about 18 months of rent money and an apology the size of Texas. That switch from begging to blaming is the oldest move in the book, and every woman has seen it at least once. The moment they realize the tears aren't working, they try to make you the villain for having a reaction to their mess. It's giving I crashed your car, but you're being really aggressive about it right now, and I don't appreciate the tone. And then this man really thought, you know what sounds like a great idea? Let me take my secret family on a cute little grocery run to the exact neighborhood where my ex's parents live. Like, sir, did you want the season finale to happen between the cereal and the canned goods? Because at this point, I think the universe was just tired of doing subtle hints with letters and money problems, and was like, okay, fine, since nobody's getting the message, I'll just put everybody in the same building. 2 years of carefully juggling lies, and this man got taken out by a grocery store. Like he dodged the truth for 24 months straight, but couldn't dodge a random aisle. The universe really said, if you won't tell her, I will. Last update. All right, last update. I've been putting this off because honestly, reliving the grocery store moment takes something out of me every time, but you guys have been so ride or die through this whole thing that I owe you the ending. So here it is. So there we are. Canned goods aisle. Me, Leighton, Mona, and a baby in a stroller who is completely unbothered and chewing on one of those rubber teething toys while 3 adults stand there in the middle of a situation that would be funny if it wasn't my actual life. Leighton was doing that thing where he talks fast and says nothing, telling me this wasn't the time, we could talk later. I was making this harder than it needed to be. I ignored him completely, looked right past him at Mona because at this point I didn't care what he had to say. I'd heard enough of his explanations to last me the rest of my life. I wanted to hear her version. Mona was quiet for a second. She was looking at Leighton and I could see her putting something together. Then she looked at me and asked how long I'd been with him. I told her over 2 years. Lived together for most of it. Her face did this thing where it sort of tightened and then went very still, and she turned to Leighton and asked him what the hell I was talking about. And that is when I realized something that changed this entire situation. Mona didn't know about me. Not really. Whatever she knew, it wasn't the truth. Because the way she turned on him wasn't the reaction of someone who knew her boyfriend had a whole live-in girlfriend. It was the reaction of someone who'd been told something completely different. Leighton tried to get between us, not physically blocking, but kind of positioning himself like he could manage the conversation if he just stood in the right spot. He started telling Mona that I was an ex, that we broke up months ago, that I was being dramatic. He said it right in front of me, called me an ex, to the mother of his child, while I was standing there. I almost laughed. I told Mona that I wasn't his ex, that I had been living with him until 6 days ago when I found a child support letter on our kitchen table, addressed to him for a child I didn't know existed, that I paid half the rent on the apartment he apparently told her he lived in alone, that 5 days before I found the letter he asked me for $1,500 while crying about being broke. Mona's whole body language changed. She pushed the stroller slightly behind her like some kind of instinct, and she looked at Leighton and told him to tell her I was lying. She said it once, steady. Tell me she's lying. He didn't say anything. She said it again louder. Tell me she's lying, Leighton. He couldn't, because I wasn't. She asked me if he'd been staying with me on the nights he wasn't with her. Not weekends, weeknights. And I said yes, every weeknight for 2 years. He came home to me every single weeknight, and her reaction to that told me that Leighton had been telling her the opposite. He told her the weeknights were work, that he worked nights or had late shifts or had to stay near his job site. The same way he told me the weekends were Trevor. He had mirror schedules. Weeknights with me, weekends with her, and both of us thinking the missing time was accounted for. Leighton was standing there watching this happen, and I've never seen someone look so cornered. He tried one more time, started saying that Mona and I were both twisting things, and it wasn't as clean-cut as either of us was making it, and if everyone would just calm down, he could explain how it got this complicated. Mona told him to stop talking. She said it without raising her voice, which was somehow worse. Just stop talking. Mona took the stroller and walked away. Down the aisle and around the corner and gone. Leighton tried to follow her, and she told him if he followed her, she was calling someone to come get her, and he could explain this to them instead. Then it was just me and him standing in that aisle. And he turned to me and started up again, telling me I just ruined everything, that Mona was going to keep his son from him now, that I didn't have to do that in front of her, that we could have handled this privately. I told him that he could have handled this privately 2 years ago by telling me the truth. I told him that every single consequence he was about to face was something he built with his own choices, and I wasn't going to feel guilty for knocking it down. He kept going, saying I was being vindictive, that he thought I was better than this. I told him he was right. I am better than this. That's why I'm leaving, and he's the one standing alone in a grocery store with nobody. I left, got in my car, drove back to my parents' house. My dad came in from the garage a few minutes later, and my mom filled him in, and he stood there drying his hands on his jeans and just slowly shook his head. Then he asked me if I'd eaten anything, and when I said no, he started pulling stuff out of the fridge to make sandwiches because that's my dad. The world could be falling apart, and he'd still want to make sure you had lunch. That was about 3 weeks ago. I'm still at my parents' house while I figure out my next move. Leighton has texted me a few more times. The tone has shifted from begging to angry to this weird fake casual thing where he asks how I'm doing like we're old friends catching up. I haven't responded to any of it. My dad went back to the apartment with my uncle and got the rest of my furniture. My name is off the lease. I got my half of the deposit back because the landlord was decent about the whole thing when my dad explained the situation. Leighton is still in that apartment, presumably still in contact with Mona, though I have no idea what's happening on that front. And honestly, I don't want to know. That's her situation to deal with. My only involvement with that man ended the day I walked out of that grocery store. Some of you asked if I ever gave him the $1,500. I didn't. And every time I think about how close I came to transferring that money, I want to go back in time and shake myself. That money was going straight to Mona's apartment. I was going to fund my own betrayal. The fact that a county clerk's office sent a letter to the wrong address is the only reason I didn't. Sienna came over last weekend and we sat on my parents' back patio, and I told her the whole story start to finish, and she just kept saying shut up every 30 seconds, which was honestly the exact reaction I needed. So yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. Sometimes the smallest clerical error saves your whole life. Wild. I'm done updating on this. Moving forward. Literally, I'm looking at apartments this week. Love you guys for real. Take care of yourselves. And if your man says he's always with Trevor, maybe ask to meet Trevor. Just a thought. Okay, so here's what I really think about all of this. This man was never gonna tell her. Never. Not in a year, not in 5, not on his deathbed. He was gonna ride this thing until the wheels fell off because men like this don't have an exit strategy. They don't have a someday I'll come clean plan. They just keep going and going and going until something external blows it up. A letter, a phone call, a grocery store run. It's never them choosing honesty. It's always the universe forcing their hand, and then they act shocked like they didn't know this day was coming. You knew, dude. You knew every single morning you woke up and chose to keep lying. And honestly, I think the saddest part of this whole thing is Mona. Because everyone's focused on the girlfriend, and rightfully so, but Mona is sitting somewhere right now with a baby, realizing that the man she was counting on was never really there either. He wasn't splitting himself between 2 women because he loved them both. He was splitting himself because he loved himself. And both of them were just there to make his life comfortable from different angles. Nobody got the real him because there is no real him. There's just whatever version gets him through the door that night. Oh, anyway, that's the story. Love you guys. See you in the next one.